At 07:48 hours on December 7th, 1941, the first wave of Japanese aircraft appears over Pearl Harbor. 183 aircraft, bombers and fighters, descend on the Pacific Fleet's anchorage. 18 minutes later, the battleship Arizona explodes. A 1,760-pound armor-piercing bomb penetrates her forward magazine. The explosion kills 1,177 men in 9 seconds. By 08:25 hours, 8 battleships are sunk or damaged, 3 cruisers are hit, 3 destroyers are destroyed, 188 aircraft are demolished on the ground, 2,335 American servicemen are dead, 68 civilians are dead. In Washington, it is 1318 hours when the attack begins. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt is in his study with Harry Hopkins, his closest advisor. The call comes from Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox at 1347 hours. Roosevelt listens without interruption. When Knox finishes, Roosevelt says this means war. He is 69 years old. He has been president for 8 years, 9 months. He has spent those years preparing America for this moment while pretending he is not. The attack itself surprises him, not the fact of war with Japan. That has been inevitable since July 1941, when Roosevelt froze Japanese assets and imposed an oil embargo. Japan imports 88% of its oil. The embargo gives Japan 3 choices: withdraw from China, invade the Dutch East Indies for oil, or submit to American demands. Roosevelt knows Japan will choose invasion. He expects the target to be the Philippines, or perhaps British Malaya, or the Dutch East Indies themselves, not Pearl Harbor. Admiral Husband Kimmel, commanding the Pacific Fleet, had different intelligence. He received warnings. War Department message sent November 27th stated hostile action possible at any moment. It advised defensive deployment. Kimmel interpreted this to mean sabotage, not attack from the sea. He ordered aircraft at Hickam Field and Wheeler Field parked in tight groups to prevent sabotage. This made them perfect targets for strafing. Lieutenant General Walter Short, commanding Hawaiian Department, received the same warning. He placed his command on Alert 1, the lowest level, guarding against sabotage, not Alert 3, which would have dispersed aircraft and manned beach defenses. Both commanders believed an attack on Hawaii impossible. The Japanese fleet would need to travel 3,500 miles across open ocean undetected. Intelligence estimated this could not be done. It was done. Roosevelt spends the afternoon of December 7th in meetings. Congressional leaders arrive at the White House. Military commanders brief casualty reports as they arrive. The numbers grow worse with each update. By evening, Roosevelt knows the Pacific Fleet is crippled. He knows the Philippines will be next. He knows the war he has prepared for has arrived in the worst possible way. At 2100 hours, he calls Grace Tully, his secretary. To his study, he dictates the speech he will deliver to Congress the next day. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. He dictates the entire speech in one session, making few revisions. The speech runs 643 words. It takes 7 minutes to deliver. Roosevelt appears before a joint session of Congress at 1230 hours on December 8th. The chamber is packed. The Supreme Court attends, the cabinet attends, diplomatic corps fill the galleries. Radio networks broadcast live to 81% of American homes. Roosevelt speaks in his characteristic voice, strong and deliberate despite the paralysis that has confined him to a wheelchair since 1921. No one sees the wheelchair. Roosevelt has hidden his disability from the public for 20 years through careful staging and a compliant press that never photographs him in the chair. He stands at the podium supported by leg braces and his son James in naval uniform. His hands grip the podium. He does not let anyone see them shake. The speech lasts 7 minutes. He recounts the attack. He lists other Japanese strikes: Malaya, Hong Kong, Guam, the Philippines, Wake Island, Midway. He states that the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. The applause interrupts him 17 times. At 1210 hours, Congress votes for war. The Senate vote is 82-0. The House vote is 388-1. Representative Jeanette Rankin of Montana casts the sole dissenting vote. She also voted against entry into World War I. The vote makes official what Roosevelt has been orchestrating for 2 years. America is at war. But Roosevelt has been fighting an undeclared war since September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. He simply could not tell the American public. The America of 1939 is staunchly isolationist. The First World War, sold as the war to end all wars, killed 116,516 Americans and accomplished nothing permanent. The Versailles Treaty failed. The League of Nations failed. Europe returned to war 21 years after the armistice. Americans see no reason to die for European problems again. This sentiment crosses party lines. Republicans oppose intervention. Democrats oppose intervention. Public opinion polls from 1939 show 95% of Americans oppose entering European wars. Roosevelt believes this is catastrophic short-sightedness. He believes Nazi Germany represents an existential threat to American security. He believes Britain and France cannot defeat Germany alone. He believes American intervention will be necessary. But he is a politician. He cannot move faster than public opinion allows. So he maneuvers. In November 1939, he persuades Congress to revise the Neutrality Acts. The revision allows belligerent nations to purchase American weapons on a cash-and-carry basis. They must pay cash. They must transport goods in their own ships. This technically maintains neutrality. In practice, it favors Britain and France, who control the Atlantic sea lanes. Germany cannot reach American ports. The revision passes narrowly. Senate vote is 63-30. House vote is 243-181. France falls in June 1940. Britain stands alone. Roosevelt knows Britain cannot survive without American support. He also knows Americans will not support direct intervention, so he finds middle paths. In September 1940, he transfers 50 aged destroyers to Britain in exchange for 99-year leases on British bases in the Western Hemisphere. The deal is struck by executive order. Bypassing Congress, the destroyers are First World War vintage, many in poor condition. But Britain is desperate. They accept. In December 1940, Winston Churchill sends Roosevelt an 8-page letter explaining Britain's financial situation. Britain is purchasing weapons with cash reserves. The reserves are nearly exhausted. Churchill requests credit or loans to continue purchases. Roosevelt cannot provide loans. Neutrality Acts forbid lending to belligerents. Americans remember Britain still owes money from World War I. Congress will never approve loans. Roosevelt devises Lend-Lease instead. The concept is simple. America will lend or lease military equipment to nations whose defense is vital to American security. No money changes hands. Equipment will be returned after the war or paid for if destroyed. Roosevelt explains the concept to the public using an analogy. If your neighbor's house is burning and he needs your garden hose, you do not negotiate a sale. You lend him the hose and expect its return. The analogy is misleading. Tanks and aircraft are not garden hoses. They will be destroyed in combat. But the analogy works. The Lend-Lease Act passes Congress in March 1941. Senate vote is 60-31. House vote is 317-71. The act authorizes $7 billion initially. By war's end, $50.1 billion in aid will be distributed. Britain receives $31.4 billion. The Soviet Union receives $11.3 billion. China receives $1.6 billion. Others receive the remainder. These figures do not include American forces' own expenditures. Total American wartime spending will reach $360 billion. Roosevelt now possesses authority to aid Britain without declaring war. He uses it aggressively. American shipyards begin repairing British vessels. American factories prioritize British orders. American merchant ships begin transporting goods to Britain despite German U-boat threats. In April 1941, Roosevelt extends the Pan-American Security Zone, where the U.S. Navy patrols, to the mid-Atlantic. American warships begin escorting convoys halfway to Britain. This is not neutrality. This is undeclared war. Roosevelt knows it. The Germans know it. The American public does not. In August 1941, Roosevelt meets Churchill off Newfoundland aboard the cruiser Augusta. Churchill arrives on the battleship Prince of Wales. The meeting produces the Atlantic Charter, a statement of shared goals. The charter calls for self-determination, free trade, freedom of the seas, disarmament. It is aspirational, not binding, but it signals Anglo-American unity. Churchill desperately wants American entry into the war. Roosevelt cannot give him that, not yet, but he can signal solidarity. By November 1941, American warships are hunting U-boats in the Atlantic. The destroyer, Reuben James is torpedoed and sunk on October 31st. 115 sailors die. This is an act of war. Roosevelt does not declare war. He asks Congress to revise neutrality legislation to allow arming merchant ships and permitting them to enter combat zones. Congress approves. American merchant vessels now sail directly to Britain, carrying weapons while armed with deck guns. The United States is fighting Germany in everything but name. Then Japan attacks Pearl Harbor and the pretense ends. Hitler solves Roosevelt's political problem by declaring war on the United States on December 11th. This is a strategic blunder of catastrophic proportions. America would have focused on Japan. The Pacific War would have consumed American resources. Britain and the Soviet Union would have faced Germany with minimal American support. Instead, Hitler honors the tripartite pact with Japan, a pact that required mutual defense only if a signatory was attacked, not if a signatory initiated war. Japan attacked America. Germany owed Japan nothing. Hitler declares war anyway. Roosevelt now has his war in Europe with full public support. He immediately establishes grand strategy. Germany first, Japan second. This prioritization is not obvious. Japan attacked America. Americans want revenge on Japan, but Roosevelt and his military chiefs understand Germany is the greater threat. Germany possesses greater industrial capacity, more advanced technology, and geographic position, threatening both the Soviet Union and Britain. Japan is isolated, dependent on conquered territories for resources, facing a revived China. Germany can win the war. Japan cannot. Churchill arrives in Washington on December 22nd for the Arcadia Conference. He stays 3 weeks. The conference establishes combined command structures, the combined chiefs of staff, composed of British and American military leaders, will coordinate Allied strategy. Unified commands are created for each theater. The conference confirms Germany First strategy. It sets target dates for operations. North Africa invasion in spring 1942. Cross-Channel invasion of France in spring 1943. These dates will prove wildly optimistic, but the framework is established. Roosevelt's challenge now is production. The United States in December 1941 is not a military superpower. The Army numbers 1.6 million men. This ranks 17th globally, behind Romania. The Navy is powerful, but split between oceans with the Pacific Fleet crippled. Aircraft production in 1941 totaled 19,433. Germany produced 12,401. Britain produced 20,094. American production is respectable but not dominant. Roosevelt intends to change this through sheer force of industrial mobilization. On January 6, 1942, he delivers the State of the Union address. He announces production targets: 60,000 aircraft in 1942. 125,000 aircraft in 1943, 45,000 tanks in 1942, 75,000 tanks in 1943, 8 million tons of shipping in 1942, 10 million tons in 1943. His advisors warned these numbers are impossible. Automotive executives said aircraft production could not exceed 40,000 annually. Maritime industry said 6 million tons of shipping is maximum. Steel industry said raw material supplies cannot support such production. Roosevelt announces the targets anyway. He understands something his critics do not. Americans respond to ambitious goals. Tell them something is impossible and they will find a way. Make the targets aspirational and industry will stretch to meet them. He is correct. American industry transforms itself. Automotive plants convert to aircraft and tank production. Shipyards expand exponentially. Ford's Willow Run plant, built specifically for bomber production, occupies 67 acres under one roof. At peak production, it completes one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. The plant employs 42,000 workers. Henry Kaiser's shipyards on the West Coast reduced Liberty ship construction time from 244 days to 42 days. One ship, the Robert E. Peary, is completed in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes as a publicity demonstration. This is absurd but proves a point. The production numbers speak for themselves. In 1942, American factories produce 47,836 aircraft. In 1943, 85,898. In 1944, 96,318. In 1945, 49,761 until production stops in August. Total wartime aircraft production reaches 296,429. No other nation approaches this. Germany produced 119,700. Britain produced 131,549. The Soviet Union produced 157,261. Tank production follows similar trajectories. American factories produced 24,997 tanks in 1942, 29,497 in 1943, 17,565 in 1944, 11,968 in 1945. Total production reaches 88,410. The Sherman medium tank, America's primary armored vehicle, accounts for 49,234 of these. The Sherman is inferior to German Panthers and Tigers in direct combat. Its 75mm gun cannot penetrate a Panther's frontal armor beyond 500 meters. A Tiger's 88mm gun can destroy a Sherman at 2,000 meters. But America produces 17 Shermans for every Panther and Tiger combined. Quantity overwhelms quality. Shipping construction is equally dramatic. American shipyards deliver 5,777 merchant vessels, totaling 56 million deadweight tons between 1941 and 1945. Liberty ships, mass-produced cargo vessels, account for 2,710 of these. Each Liberty ship can carry 10,450 tons of cargo. They are built in sections, welded together rather than riveted, allowing unskilled workers to assemble them. Quality is inconsistent. Some ships break apart in heavy seas, but production speed compensates. German U-boats sink Allied ships faster than Britain can replace them. American production exceeds sinking rates by 1943. The U-boat threat collapses under the weight of American industrial output. Roosevelt coordinates this production through alphabet agencies. The War Production Board allocates raw materials and sets priorities. The Office of Price Administration controls prices and rations consumer goods. The War Manpower Commission directs labor allocation. The Office of War Mobilization coordinates everything. These agencies possess extraordinary power. They can commandeer factories. They can prohibit civilian production. They can set wages and prices. In a capitalist democracy, this represents unprecedented government control. American business complies because Roosevelt makes compliance profitable. Cost-plus contracts guarantee manufacturers' profit margins regardless of expenses. Defense plants receive expedited depreciation, reducing tax liability. The government builds new factories and leases them to manufacturers at nominal rates. After the war, manufacturers can purchase these factories at 25 to 30% of construction costs. The result is the largest government-subsidized industrial expansion in history. Corporate profits rise 50% during the war, despite price controls. Labor shares less generously. Wages are frozen through National War Labor Board orders. Union strike rights are curtailed. Workers are directed to essential industries whether they consent or not. But unemployment, which stood at 14.6% in 1940, falls to 1.2% by 1944. 16 million Americans are in uniform. The remaining workforce is fully employed. Women enter the workforce in unprecedented numbers. By 1945, 19 million women work outside the home, up from 12 million in 1940. Rosie the Riveter becomes the symbol of this transformation. Though the image obscures the reality that women are paid 60% of male wages for identical work, African Americans face worse. Defense industries initially refuse to hire them. Roosevelt needs black votes in the 1940 election and cannot afford their alienation. In June 1941, as Philip Randolph organizes a march on Washington to protest defense industry discrimination, Roosevelt issues Executive Order 8802. The order bans discrimination in defense industries and creates the Fair Employment Practices Committee to enforce it. The FEPC has minimal enforcement power and is chronically underfunded, but the principle is established. By war's end, 2 million African Americans work in defense industries. The military is segregated. Black soldiers serve in segregated units under white officers. The Navy restricts black sailors to mess duties until 1942. The Marine Corps accepts no black recruits until 1942. The Army Air Forces grudgingly accepts black pilots, but segregates them at Tuskegee. Roosevelt refuses to desegregate the military despite pressure from civil rights leaders. He fears Southern Democratic opposition. His political coalition depends on maintaining Southern support. He will not sacrifice that for principle. This calculation defines Roosevelt's leadership style. He is pragmatic, not idealistic. He compromises when necessary. He advances when possible. He never moves faster than political reality allows. His goal is victory. Moral considerations are secondary. The strategic question facing Roosevelt in 1942 is where to fight first. The Soviet Union is bleeding. Stalin demands a second front in France to draw German divisions west. Churchill opposes cross-channel invasion in 1942. British forces are not ready. American forces are utterly unprepared. Churchill proposes North Africa instead. Control North Africa, then invade Sicily, then Italy. This Mediterranean strategy would postpone France's invasion to 1944. Roosevelt agrees with Churchill over his own military chiefs. General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, wants France invasion in 1943. Marshall argues North Africa is a sideshow diverting resources from the main objective. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, wants priority given to the Pacific. King argues Japan threatens Australia and New Zealand. America should concentrate there. Roosevelt overrules both. North Africa invasion. Operation Torch launches November 8, 1942. The decision reflects Roosevelt's political calculations. American forces must engage Germans in 1942 to maintain Soviet morale and public support. North Africa offers the only feasible option. American troops are green. They need combat experience before facing German main strength in France. North Africa provides this. The operation also appeases Churchill, whose support Roosevelt needs, and it positions Allied forces to threaten Italy, the weakest Axis power. Operation Torch lands 3 separate forces. Western Task Force lands at Casablanca, Morocco. Central Task Force lands at Oran, Algeria. Eastern Task Force lands at Algiers. Total forces number 107,000, mostly American with British naval support. Vichy French forces, theoretically defending North Africa for Germany, resist half-heartedly. Casablanca fighting lasts 3 days. Oran resists 2 days. Algiers surrenders within hours. Admiral François Darlan, Vichy commander in North Africa and a committed collaborator, orders a ceasefire. Allied casualties total 584 killed. French casualties exceed 1,500. The Darlan deal creates political controversy. Darlan agrees to order Vichy forces to join the Allies. In exchange, Allies recognize him as High Commissioner of French North Africa. This means cooperating with a fascist collaborator who implemented anti-Jewish laws and collaborated with German occupation. Roosevelt defends the arrangement as temporary military necessity. Darlan is assassinated on December 24th by a French monarchist. The problem resolves itself. The North African campaign extends into May 1943. German and Italian forces in Tunisia resist fiercely. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps, retreating from Egypt, joins Italian forces defending Tunisia. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, German forces maul inexperienced American units. American casualties exceed 6,000. German casualties are less than 1,000. American commanders learn painful lessons about German tactical superiority, but American material superiority proves decisive. By May 13th, Axis forces in Tunisia surrender. 275,000 prisoners are taken. This exceeds Stalingrad's capture total. Roosevelt meets Churchill again in Casablanca in January 1943. Stalin is invited but refuses to leave the Soviet Union while Stalingrad battle continues. The conference sets strategy for the remainder of 1943. Sicily invasion is confirmed for summer. Strategic bombing of Germany will intensify. U-boat war will receive increased resources. Most significantly, Roosevelt announces unconditional surrender policy. Germany, Italy, and Japan must surrender unconditionally. No negotiated peace, no armistice terms, complete surrender or total defeat. Churchill is surprised by this announcement. It was not discussed beforehand. Roosevelt springs it during a press conference. His reasoning is multiple. Unconditional surrender prevents any Axis power from seeking separate peace. It reassures Stalin that Western allies will not negotiate with Germany behind Soviet backs. It satisfies American public opinion, which wants total victory. It echoes Ulysses Grant's unconditional surrender demand at Fort Donelson. Roosevelt admires Grant. He wants to be remembered similarly. Critics argue unconditional surrender policy stiffens Axis resistance. If defeat means total subjugation, better to fight to the death. This criticism has merit. German propaganda exploits the policy, claiming only Nazi victory can save Germany from annihilation. But Roosevelt believes negotiated peace would allow fascism to survive and rearm. Only complete defeat will eliminate the Axis threat. He is willing to accept prolonged war to achieve this. Sicily invasion. Operation Husky launches July 9, 1943. Allied forces number 478,000. They face 230,000 Italian and 40,000 German defenders. The island falls by August 17th. Italian casualties and prisoners exceed 147,000. German casualties are 29,000. Allied casualties total 24,000. More significantly, the invasion triggers Mussolini's fall. The Italian fascist Grand Council votes to remove him on July 25. King Victor Emmanuel III orders his arrest. Italy's new government under Marshal Pietro Badoglio seeks armistice terms. Italy surrenders September 8. The surrender is announced publicly before German forces can disarm Italian units. This is deliberate. Roosevelt and Churchill want Italian forces to switch sides or at least stop fighting. Some do. Most are disarmed by Germans. Italy becomes a battleground. German forces occupy the country and establish defensive lines. Allied forces land at Salerno on September 9th. The Italian campaign, intended as a quick victory, becomes a grinding attritional struggle lasting until May 1945. Roosevelt calls it the soft underbelly of Europe. Churchill promotes this phrase. In reality, Italy is mountainous terrain favoring defense. German forces under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring exploit every ridge and river. The Gustav Line, anchored on Monte Cassino, stops Allied advance for 5 months. Anzio landing in January 1944, intended to bypass the Gustav Line, becomes a trapped beachhead, requiring desperate fighting to hold. American casualties in Italy total 114,000 by war's end. British and Commonwealth casualties exceed 150,000. The soft underbelly proves anything but. The real second front opens June 6, 1944. Operation Overlord lands Allied forces in Normandy. This is the culmination of 2 years planning and the largest amphibious operation in history. The invasion fleet numbers 5,333 ships and 11,000 aircraft. First-day assault forces total 156,000 men landing across 5 beaches. American forces land at Utah and Omaha. British and Canadian forces land at Gold, Juneau, and Sword. Roosevelt does not travel to England for the invasion. He is too ill. His health has been declining since 1943. He has congestive heart failure. His blood pressure is dangerously elevated. His doctors tell him to rest. He refuses. He monitors Overlord from the White House, receiving updates every few hours. When he learns the invasion has succeeded, that Allied forces are ashore despite heavy casualties at Omaha Beach, he leads the nation in prayer. His prayers broadcast on radio. Millions of Americans listen. He thanks God for the progress and asks for continued blessings. He acknowledges the cost. He promises to see it through to victory. He is 62 years old. He will not live to see that victory. The election of 1944 takes place as Allied forces grind through France. Roosevelt seeks an unprecedented 4th term. His health is visibly failing. He has lost weight. His hands shake. His face is gaunt. Rumors circulate that he is dying. His campaign managers hide his condition as much as possible. They limit his public appearances. They photograph him from angles that conceal his deterioration. They select Harry Truman as vice presidential candidate specifically because Truman is acceptable to party factions and can assume the presidency if necessary. Roosevelt defeats Republican Thomas Dewey by 3.6 million votes in the popular vote, 432 to 99 in the Electoral College. The victory margin is smaller than 1940, but still decisive. Americans will not change leadership with the war unfinished. Roosevelt wins his 4th term. He will serve 82 days of it. In February 1945, Roosevelt travels to Yalta to meet Stalin and Churchill. The conference determines post-war Europe's shape. Poland's borders are redrawn. Germany will be divided into occupation zones. The Soviet Union promises to enter the war against Japan within 3 months of Germany's defeat. In exchange, the Soviets receive the Kuril Islands in southern Sakhalin. The conference also discusses the United Nations organization Roosevelt has championed since 1941. The United Nations represents Roosevelt's vision for post-war order. He learned from Woodrow Wilson's failure. Wilson's League of Nations excluded major powers and lacked enforcement mechanisms. Roosevelt designs the UN differently. The Security Council will include the 5 great powers: America, Britain, France, China, and the Soviet Union, as permanent members with veto power. This recognizes reality. Peace requires great power cooperation. Giving them vetoes ensures participation. Smaller nations will have representation in the General Assembly, but no veto. This is hierarchical and undemocratic but pragmatic. Critics attack the Yalta agreements as appeasing Stalin. They argue Roosevelt sold out Eastern Europe. This criticism intensifies after Soviet domination of Eastern Europe becomes clear. Roosevelt's defenders argue he extracted maximum concessions possible given Soviet military control of the region. The Red Army occupied Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. Roosevelt had no leverage to deny Stalin control. He could only extract promises of democratic elections. Stalin violated those promises, but Roosevelt could not prevent that through negotiation. Roosevelt returns from Yalta exhausted. He addresses Congress on March 1st while sitting, unusual for him. He acknowledges his disability publicly for the first time, mentioning the 10 pounds of steel on his legs. His speech lacks his normal vigor. He stumbles over words. His hands shake holding his papers. Congressional observers are shocked by his appearance. He looks 20 years older than his photographs suggest. He travels to Warm Springs, Georgia on March 30th. Warm Springs is his retreat, a polio treatment center he founded in 1927. He goes there to rest and regain strength. He brings his stamp collection and correspondence to answer. He works on his Jefferson Day speech, scheduled for delivery on April 13th. The speech argues that the only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. On April 12th, at 1315 hours, Roosevelt is sitting for a portrait. Lucy Mercer Rutherford, his mistress from 30 years earlier, is present. They have resumed their relationship in secret. Eleanor knows but says nothing. At 1315 hours, Roosevelt says, "I have a terrific pain in the back of my head." He slumps forward. He is carried to his bedroom. A doctor arrives within minutes. Roosevelt is unconscious. His blood pressure is 300/190. At 1535 hours, he dies of a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Vice President Harry Truman is summoned to the White House at 1705 hours. Eleanor Roosevelt tells him the president is dead. Truman asks what he can do for her. She responds, "Is there anything we can do for you? For you are the one in trouble now." At 1909 hours, Truman is sworn in as the 33rd president. He has been vice president for 82 days. Roosevelt never briefed him on the atomic bomb project or any major war plans. The news reaches Churchill in London. He later writes he felt as if he had been struck a physical blow. Stalin is informed in Moscow. He orders a day of mourning, unprecedented for a foreign leader. In Germany, Joseph Goebbels calls Hitler with the news. He says, "My Führer, I congratulate you. Roosevelt is dead. It is written in the stars that the second half of April will be the turning point for us." Goebbels believes Roosevelt's death will split the Allied coalition, that America will make peace. He is wrong. The war continues. Hitler commits suicide 18 days later. Roosevelt's body returns to Washington on April 14th. His funeral procession to the White House draws hundreds of thousands. Mourners line Pennsylvania Avenue. Military bands play. The nation grieves. He is buried at his Hyde Park estate on April 15th. Over 1,000 people attend. Eleanor places a wreath. She does not cry. She never cried publicly about Franklin. Their marriage was partnership, not romance. It had been that way since she discovered his affair with Lucy Mercer in 1918. Roosevelt led America for 12 years, 1 month, 9 days. He guided the nation from economic collapse to global supremacy. When he assumed office in March 1933, unemployment stood at 25%. 16 million Americans were jobless. Banks were failing. Farms were foreclosing. The economy had contracted 46% from its 1929 peak. Roosevelt's New Deal arrested the collapse through aggressive government intervention. Programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps, Works Progress Administration, and Social Security fundamentally altered the relationship between government and citizens. Critics called him a socialist. He called himself a pragmatist, trying anything that might work. The Depression never fully ended until war production began. This is the uncomfortable truth. The New Deal eased suffering and provided employment, but did not restore prosperity. Unemployment remained above 14% in 1940. War orders brought recovery. Defense spending rose from $1.5 billion in 1940 to $83 billion in 1945. This government spending stimulated demand beyond anything the New Deal achieved. The war proved Keynesian economics. Government deficit spending could restore full employment. Roosevelt never admitted this, but he understood it. His war leadership transformed America into a superpower. The United States in 1939 was a regional power, strong economically but militarily weak and diplomatically isolated. The United States in 1945 possessed the world's most powerful military, controlled half of global economic output, and led the alliance that defeated fascism. American troops occupied Germany, Japan, and outposts across the Pacific. American dollars would rebuild Europe through the Marshall Plan. American leadership would shape international institutions for 70 years. This transformation occurred because Roosevelt understood industrial mobilization and political management. He knew American industry could outproduce any rival if properly directed. He built the administrative structure to direct it. He knew Americans would fight if given clear reasons and competent leadership. He provided both. He knew victory required alliance management, balancing competing British and Soviet demands while maintaining American priorities. He managed Churchill's enthusiasm and Stalin's paranoia while securing American interests. His methods were often questionable. He lied to the American public about the extent of American involvement before Pearl Harbor. He interned 110,000 Japanese Americans, two-thirds of them citizens, without trial or evidence of disloyalty. He refused to desegregate the military despite knowing segregation was unjust. He declined to bomb Auschwitz rail lines when doing so might have saved thousands. He approved area bombing of German and Japanese cities that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. He made deals with fascist collaborators when convenient. He promised Stalin things he could not deliver and delivered things he had not promised. But he won. That is the essential fact. America entered the war from a position of weakness and emerged dominant. Allies trusted American leadership. Enemies feared American power. Roosevelt created this through 12 years of sustained effort and political skill. He understood that power requires both strength and the will to use it. He built the strength through industrial mobilization. He demonstrated the will through strategic commitment to total victory. The cost was paid by 407,316 American servicemen who died in combat, by 671,846 wounded, by 130,000 taken prisoner, by hundreds of thousands more who returned physically intact but psychologically damaged. The cost was paid by civilians who rationed food and gasoline and accepted government control of the economy, by women who entered factories and then were forced out when veterans returned, by African Americans and Japanese Americans who served loyally despite discrimination and internment. Roosevelt asked these sacrifices and received them because Americans believed in his leadership. They elected him 4 times. They trusted him through depression and war. They forgave his deceptions because they understood the stakes. When he died, millions mourned genuinely, not because he was perfect, but because he led them through the worst crisis in American history and delivered victory. The arsenal of democracy he built survived him. American defense production capacity, developed during the war, would sustain the Cold War. The military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned against in 1961 was Roosevelt's creation. The international institutions he championed, the United Nations, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, would shape global order for decades. The alliance system he constructed, binding America to Europe through NATO, would prevent the isolationism he feared. His legacy is the American superpower. The nation that emerged from World War II bore little resemblance to the nation Roosevelt inherited in 1933. It was larger, riche, more powerful, more confident, more active globally. It had learned that isolation was impossible, that American security required engagement beyond American borders, that American prosperity depended on global stability. Whether this was good or inevitable remains debated. Critics argue American hegemony created as many problems as it solved, that superpower status corrupted American democracy, that the costs of global leadership exceeded the benefits. Defenders argue American leadership prevented worse alternatives, that Soviet expansion would have proceeded unchecked without American opposition, that European reconstruction required American resources. Roosevelt would have rejected this debate. He was not interested in philosophy. He was interested in results. He faced a collapsing economy and restored it. He faced fascist aggression and defeated it. He faced an America retreating from the world and engaged it. The methods were imperfect. The outcomes were successful. That was sufficient. The monument to Roosevelt in Washington stands near the tidal basin. It occupies 7.5 acres. 4 outdoor rooms represent his 4 terms. Waterfalls cascade between them. Bronze sculptures depict Depression-era breadlines and fireside chats. Roosevelt appears seated in a wheelchair, acknowledging the disability he hid for decades. The design is understated, avoiding triumphalism. Roosevelt preferred this. He once said, "If any memorial is erected to me, I know exactly what I should like it to be." A block about the size of this, gesturing to his desk, and placed in the center of that green plot in front of the archives building. His wishes were ignored. The memorial is substantial, but it captures his legacy appropriately, not through glorification but through representation of the era he shaped and the people he led. History remembers the leadership, the fireside chats that calmed a panicked nation, the declaration that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, the 4 freedom speech articulating what America fought for: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. These were not mere words. They were promises Roosevelt intended to deliver. He delivered some, not all. The post-war world would have freedom from fear of fascism, but not freedom from fear of communism or nuclear war. It would have freedom from want for some nations, but not others. It would have freedom of speech in democracies, but not in dictatorships. Roosevelt knew the world he was creating would be imperfect. He proceeded anyway because imperfect victory was better than perfect defeat. The strategic decisions he made shaped the war's outcome. The Germany First strategy concentrated resources where they mattered most. The unconditional surrender policy prevented negotiated peace that would have left fascism intact. The Lend-Lease program kept Britain fighting and enabled Soviet survival. The industrial mobilization created material superiority that overwhelmed Axis forces. The alliance management maintained coalition unity, despite profound ideological differences and conflicting interests. These were not inevitable. Churchill wanted Mediterranean strategy emphasizing peripheral campaigns. Stalin wanted immediate second front regardless of readiness. Military chiefs wanted Pacific priority or faster movement against Germany. Roosevelt balanced these demands while maintaining strategic coherence. He compromised on timing and location, but never on objectives. Germany must be defeated first. Defeat must be total. The alliance must hold. These principles guided every decision. His failures were substantial. The refusal to bomb Auschwitz remains inexplicable. Requests came from Jewish organizations and the Polish government in exile in 1944. Aerial photographs showed the rail lines, the camp structures, the gas chambers. American bombers struck industrial targets less than 5 miles from Auschwitz. Diverting one mission could have destroyed the crematoriums or disrupted rail transport. The War Department rejected these requests. Assistant Secretary of War John McCloy stated that such operations would divert essential resources and might provoke even more vindictive action by the Germans. This reasoning was cowardice disguised as strategy. Roosevelt never overruled McCloy. He never addressed the requests personally. His silence enabled the continued functioning of the death machine until Soviet forces liberated the camp in January 1945. Japanese-American internment was equally indefensible. Executive Order 9066, signed February 19, 1942, authorized military commanders to exclude any persons from designated areas. The order never mentions Japanese Americans explicitly, but everyone understood its target. Lieutenant General John DeWitt, commanding Western Defense Command, implemented the order zealously. He established military zones along the West Coast and ordered all persons of Japanese ancestry removed. 110,000 people, 62% of them American citizens, were forced from their homes. They were allowed to bring only what they could carry. Their property was sold at forced liquidation prices or simply abandoned. They were sent to internment camps in remote locations: Manzanar in California, Tula Lake in California, Minidoka in Idaho, Jerome in Arkansas. These camps were surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Families lived in tar paper barracks with minimal privacy and inadequate heating. No evidence of Japanese-American sabotage or espionage existed. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover stated there was no evidence supporting mass internment. The Office of Naval Intelligence concluded Japanese Americans posed no security threat. Roosevelt authorized internment anyway. The political pressure from West Coast politicians and newspapers was intense. California Attorney General Earl Warren, later Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, advocated for removal. Roosevelt chose political expediency over constitutional principles. The Supreme Court upheld internment in Korematsu v. United States in 1944. Justice Frank Murphy dissented, calling the decision a legalization of racism. He was correct. Roosevelt's compromise on civil rights reflected similar calculations. He needed Southern Democratic votes in Congress to pass war legislation. Southern Democrats controlled key committee chairmanships through seniority. They would block any civil rights legislation. Roosevelt accepted this. He issued executive orders banning discrimination in defense industries and federal employment, but refused to desegregate the military or support anti-lynching legislation. He told civil rights leaders that he sympathized but could not act without losing congressional support. This was true. It was also inadequate. Leadership requires more than sympathy. It requires action. Roosevelt failed to provide it. The area bombing campaign against Germany and Japan killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. The combined bomber offensive, launched in 1943, targeted German industrial centers. American doctrine emphasized precision daylight bombing of military targets. British doctrine emphasized nighttime area bombing of civilian areas to break German morale. In practice, American bombing was less precise than doctrine suggested. Cloud cover, navigation errors, and flak forced bombers to drop loads without visual confirmation of targets. Dresden, bombed in February 1945, killed 25,000 civilians in firestorms. Hamburg, bombed in July 1943, killed 42,000. These raids occurred with Roosevelt's knowledge and approval. Japanese cities suffered worse. American bombers under General Curtis LeMay shifted to incendiary attacks in March 1945. Japanese cities, built primarily of wood and paper, burned easily. Tokyo firebombing on March 9th and 10th killed 100,000 civilians in one night. Subsequent raids on Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, and dozens of smaller cities killed hundreds of thousands more. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August killed another 200,000 immediately, with thousands more dying from radiation effects later. Roosevelt did not live to see the atomic bombs used, but he authorized the Manhattan Project and approved targeting Japanese cities. The moral calculus of these decisions remains contested. Defenders argue area bombing shortened the war. The German and Japanese war production depended on civilian labor and urban infrastructure. That enemy regimes showed no restraint in targeting civilian populations. Critics argue intentional targeting of civilians violates just war principles regardless of enemy actions. That the campaigns failed to break morale or significantly reduce war production. That they constituted war crimes. Roosevelt faced these arguments during the war. He authorized the campaigns because he believed they would hasten victory and reduce American casualties. Whether he was correct remains unknown because we cannot know what would have happened otherwise. What is known is that Roosevelt prioritized victory over restraint. He was willing to accept moral ambiguity to achieve strategic objectives. This pragmatism defined his leadership. He was not idealistic. He was not particularly principled. He was effective. He understood power and how to accumulate and deploy it. He understood politics and how to build coalitions and maintain support. He understood that winning required making choices that perfect people would not make. He made those choices without apparent anguish or doubt. His relationship with Churchill illustrated this. Churchill was brilliant, eloquent, and exhausting. He proposed operations constantly, each one more ambitious than the last. Invade Norway, invade the Balkans, invade Rhodes, expand Mediterranean operations. Each proposal aimed to protect British interests while deferring direct confrontation with German main strength. Roosevelt listened patiently. He rejected most proposals politely. He maintained the alliance while rejecting British strategy. Churchill needed American resources. Roosevelt needed British experience and bases. The relationship worked because each understood what the other required. His relationship with Stalin was more complex. Stalin trusted no one. He believed capitalism and communism were inherently incompatible. That alliance was temporary convenience preceding inevitable confrontation. Roosevelt believed personal diplomacy could overcome ideological differences. He thought he could charm Stalin, that treating him as partner rather than adversary would encourage cooperation. This was naive. Stalin exploited Roosevelt's goodwill while pursuing Soviet interests ruthlessly. He demanded a second front while refusing to share intelligence. He extracted territorial concessions while violating agreements on Polish elections. He used Lend-Lease supplies while stealing American technology. Roosevelt recognized this, but accepted it, because the alternative was worse. Without Soviet resistance, Germany would have concentrated its entire military against the West. D-Day would have failed. The war would have lasted years longer. Soviet casualties, estimated at 27 million, absorbed German military power that otherwise would have been deployed against American and British forces. Roosevelt paid for this with Lend-Lease supplies and post-war concessions. It was transactional. It was effective. Stalin kept Germany occupied. Roosevelt kept Stalin supplied. The partnership achieved its purpose even if it did not create lasting friendship. The atomic bomb project represented Roosevelt's vision of American technological superiority translated into strategic advantage. The Manhattan Project began in August 1942, after scientists convinced Roosevelt that atomic weapons were theoretically possible, and that Germany might develop them first. The project cost $2 billion, employed 130,000 people, and operated in complete secrecy. Roosevelt told Churchill, but not Stalin. He told Vice President Truman nothing. The compartmentalization was absolute. Workers at Oak Ridge, Tennessee knew they were enriching uranium, but not why. Workers at Hanford, Washington knew they were producing plutonium, but not its purpose. Only a handful of senior scientists and administrators understood the full scope. Roosevelt died 4 months before the first test. He never knew whether the weapon would work. He authorized development on faith that American science and industry could achieve what seemed impossible. He was correct. The Trinity test on July 16, 1945 proved the weapon functioned. Truman, now president, decided to use it against Japan. Whether Roosevelt would have made the same decision remains speculative. His record suggests he would have. He authorized firebombing Japanese cities. He demanded unconditional surrender. He wanted the war ended quickly. The atomic bomb achieved that. Its use killed 200,000 but potentially saved hundreds of thousands of American casualties an invasion would have cost. By Roosevelt's calculus, this was acceptable. The world Roosevelt left behind in April 1945 was fundamentally different from the world he inherited in March 1933. America in 1933 was weak, isolationist, economically devastated, politically divided. America in 1945 was powerful, internationally engaged, economically dominant, politically confident. This transformation did not occur naturally. It required leadership that understood what needed to be done and possessed the political skill to do it despite opposition. Roosevelt provided that leadership. He was not a military strategist. He left tactical decisions to Marshall, King, and theater commanders. He was not an economic theorist. He left production planning to mobilization agencies. He was a politician who understood how to build consensus, how to communicate complex ideas simply, how to maintain support through difficulty, how to project confidence even when uncertain. These skills matter more than technical expertise in wartime leadership. Victory requires popular support sustained over years. Roosevelt maintained that support through 4 elections and 12 years of crisis. His methods often bordered on deception. The destroyer deal bypassed Congress. Lend-Lease pretended equipment would be returned when everyone knew it would be destroyed. Undeclared naval war in the Atlantic violated neutrality before Pearl Harbor. These actions stretched constitutional limits. Roosevelt justified them as necessary to prepare America for war without triggering isolationist backlash. Whether this justification is adequate depends on whether you believe leaders can lie to citizens for their own good. Roosevelt believed they could when necessity demanded. His success suggests he was correct, at least pragmatically. Whether he was correct morally remains contested. The arsenal of democracy he created outlasted him. American defense production established during World War II never fully demobilized. The Cold War required sustained military production. The military-industrial complex grew from wartime origins. Defense contractors who built tanks and bombers in the 1940s built missiles and aircraft in the 1950s. Shipyards that produced destroyers and carriers continued production through the Cold War. The industrial capacity Roosevelt mobilized became a permanent feature of American economy. This had consequences Roosevelt did not foresee. Eisenhower warned in 1961 that the conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry created potential for misplaced power. Defense spending became self-perpetuating. Contractors lobbied for programs. Congressional districts depended on defense jobs. Military services competed for budgets. The system Roosevelt created to defeat fascism became a system that sustained itself through perceived threats. Whether this was necessary or corrupting remains debated. What is not debated is that Roosevelt fundamentally altered America's global role. Before Roosevelt, America was regional power that occasionally intervened abroad but preferred isolation. After Roosevelt, America was global power with commitments on every continent. This transformation was intentional. Roosevelt believed isolation was impossible in the modern world, that American security required active engagement, that American prosperity depended on stable international order. He built institutions to implement this vision: the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the Bretton Woods system. These institutions embedded American leadership in international structures. Critics call this imperialism, defenders call it international order. Both are partially correct. American power after 1945 operated differently than European colonialism, but still represented dominant power imposing preferences on weaker nations. The difference was that American hegemony operated through institutions and economic influence rather than direct colonial control. This made it more acceptable internationally and more sustainable domestically. Roosevelt understood this. He designed post-war order to maximize American influence while minimizing appearance of domination. His domestic legacy is equally significant. Social Security, established in 1935, remains foundation of American retirement system. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, created in 1933, prevents bank runs. Securities and Exchange Commission, created in 1934, regulates financial markets. These New Deal institutions became permanent features of American government. They represent expansion of federal responsibility that conservatives opposed but could not eliminate. Roosevelt's fundamental insight was that capitalism requires regulation to function fairly, that markets require government intervention to prevent abuse, that citizens deserve protection from economic catastrophe beyond their control. Whether he believed this ideologically or adopted it pragmatically is unclear. Roosevelt was not ideological. He tried programs that worked and abandoned programs that failed. Social Security worked. It enjoyed popular support and reduced elderly poverty. Bank regulation worked. It prevented the financial panics that plagued 19th century America. Securities regulation worked. It restored confidence in financial markets. These successes were sufficient justification. Roosevelt was not building socialism. He was preventing capitalism's collapse by making it function better. His political coalition, the New Deal coalition, dominated American politics for 4 decades. Urban workers, ethnic minorities, Southern whites, intellectuals, and organized labor united behind Democratic Party. This coalition won 7 of 9 presidential elections from 1932 to 1964. It controlled Congress almost continuously over the same period. The coalition fractured after 1968 over civil rights, Vietnam, and social issues, but its duration demonstrated Roosevelt's political skill. He built a coalition that outlasted him by 3 decades. The personal cost of his leadership remains difficult to assess. He worked constantly. He slept 5 hours nightly. He chain-smoked. He drank heavily. His blood pressure was dangerously high from at least 1944. His doctors prescribed rest. He ignored them. The presidency consumed him completely. His marriage was partnership, not intimacy. Eleanor lived separately, pursued her own projects, and tolerated his infidelities. Their children were neglected. All 5 suffered from their father's absence and their parents' complicated relationship. James became alcoholic. Eliot married 5 times. Franklin Jr. struggled with depression. None achieved their father's success. Roosevelt sacrificed his health, his family, and potentially his integrity to win the war. Whether this was noble or necessary or simply what great leadership requires cannot be answered definitively. What can be said is that he made choices others would not make, accepted burdens others would not carry, and achieved objectives others thought impossible. This is leadership, not perfect leadership, not morally unambiguous leadership, but effective leadership that delivered results. When Truman assumed the presidency on April 12, 1945, He inherited military forces numbering 12 million, an economy producing half of global output, and strategic position dominating both oceans. Germany would surrender in 26 days. Japan would surrender in 116 days. America would emerge from the war richer than when it entered, the only major power whose territory was not devastated by combat. This was Roosevelt's legacy. He took a nation on its knees and raised it to dominance. The methods were imperfect. The outcome was unprecedented. The Roosevelt Memorial in Washington includes his words carved in granite. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have little. This was Roosevelt's domestic philosophy. His foreign policy philosophy was simpler. America must engage the world because isolation is impossible. Threats must be confronted early because appeasement fails. Alliances must be maintained because America cannot stand alone. Victory requires industrial might, political will, and sustained commitment. These principles guided him through depression and war. They shaped the post-war world. They remained contested but undeniably consequential. Franklin Delano Roosevelt died at 63 years old after 12 years, 1 month, 9 days in office. He served longer than any president before or since. Constitutional amendment now limits presidents to 2 terms. Roosevelt's 4 terms will never be repeated. This is probably appropriate. Power concentrated that long risks corruption, but Roosevelt's era required sustained leadership. The Depression and war were not problems that could be solved in 4 or 8 years. They required decade-plus commitment. Roosevelt provided it. Whether another leader could have succeeded as completely is unknowable. What is known is that Roosevelt did succeed. That America in 1945 was stronger than America in 1933. That the transformation was deliberate. And that Roosevelt was the architect. History judges leaders by outcomes. Roosevelt's outcomes were victory over fascism, economic recovery, and American emergence as superpower. These justify his place among great presidents. They do not excuse his failures. Internment, civil rights compromise, civilian bombing, and refusal to rescue Jews remain stains on his record. Great leaders are not perfect leaders. They are leaders who achieve great things despite imperfections. Roosevelt achieved great things. The cost was high. The alternative would have been higher. This is the uncomfortable truth of wartime leadership. Victory requires choices that peacetime morality condemns. Roosevelt made those choices. America won. The world he left behind was better than the world that would have existed had he failed, even if it was not the perfect world he promised.